Shabbat Shalom. Good morning, everyone. I am Rabbi Jenny Greenspan for Congregation Beth-El Zedek. I'm here for our weekly Shabbat morning Torah Talk. So say Shabbat Shalom. Give us a moment to collect ourselves this morning. If you, as usual, if you would like to follow along with me in the Etz Chaim Chumash, this week we are reading from Parashat Vayelech, and he went, which can be found in the Etz Chaim Chumash on page 1173. So if you have a hard copy of that, flip right there to page 1173. If you'd like to download a PDF, it is available under our virtual Shabbat resources on bez613.org. If you have a different copy of a Chumash, of any edition of the Chumash, you should be able to find Parashat Vayelech almost to the back of the book, Deuteronomy chapter 31. So I'll give us a couple of moments to gather and then we will jump in, noting that it's a bit of a somber day, at least here in the United States, as we remember the 20th anniversary of the attacks on our country on September 11th, 2001. And I think this Torah portion has a message that plays into thinking about those moments of pain and how we share moments of pain. So we will come to that in just a moment, but for now, let's say Shabbat Shalom and good morning and welcome to the Sclares. It's a quiet morning, which is normal for the Shabbat in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I'm going to say welcome, Shabbat Shalom to Alan Hamburger. Glad that you are here as well. And we will go ahead and get started as a small live group, and hopefully others will be able to gather later when they are ready. Shabbat Shalom, good morning to Jody Zucker as well. So as I said, we are in Parashat Vayelech, which is the third from last Torah portion of our Torah. Shabbat Shalom, good morning to Jim Roth. This is really the we're all gathering now. Good. So Shabbat Shalom and welcome to the Seagulls and to Larry Spector as well. So glad that we are all here. And so we are in Parashat Vayelech, which begins on Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 1. It's not a very long Torah portion. This is one that in communities that do the triennial Torah reading, the partial Torah reading like ours, each week, we actually, in years that we're able to do a fuller Torah reading because we are gathered for a fuller service, we would end up reading the entire Torah portion even if we normally do the partial, the third each year over 3 years. This is not a very long Torah portion, but it is one that leads us into the end of the book. It is the second to last Torah portion read on a Shabbat, though it's really the third from last Torah portion as a whole. The final Torah portion of the Torah is actually never read on a Shabbat. It's reserved for Simchat Torah, and the holiday that we celebrate right at the end of Sukkot, right at the end, right after Sukkot, immediately following, that we will do in a couple of weeks. And that one truly closes the Torah portion, and it's called V'zot HaBracha, and this is the blessing. And in that Torah portion, Moses gives a blessing to each of the 12 tribes before he passes on. And there's a little hint toward that in this week's Torah portion that we're going to look at together. Next week we will have Ha'azinu, which is a bit of a song, his final song poem to remind all of the people of all that we have gone through, and what Moses's and God's expectations of us will be after Moses' passing, because he knows that he is at his end. And that's kind of the core of this Torah portion, all three of the final Torah portions, that Moses is very aware that he is about to be departing from this earth, and is trying to get in the last things that he wants the people to know, and that he would want us to know, which is why they're right here in our Torah. So Moses goes, is the Vayelech. So let's look at the very opening of this Torah portion. Again, if you have an Etz Chaim Chumash, either in physical or in digital form, I'm on page 1173. If you're following in a different Chumash, it's the very opening of Parashat Vayelech, or Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 1. Vayelech Moshe vaydaber et hadvarim ha'ele el kol Yisrael. And Moses went and spoke these things to all of Israel. The commentators say that this is kind of an interesting opening verse for our Torah portion, because in truth, I know I just said these three Torah portions are his concluding, but last week's Torah portion was also included in his concluding speeches. In truth, since Kitavo, Moses has been kind of on this is everything I want everyone to know. He's been preparing for his deathbed and sharing all of that he's learned and all of that he has seen over the years. Remember, the generation of Israelites that he speaks to now at the end of his life are not the actual people who went forth out of Egypt, but their children. And so he's giving his account of the full history of the Israelites' journey from Egypt to the land of Israel that they're about to enter, though, as I noted in my Rosh Hashanah sermon, we won't actually see them enter in the Torah. So he's been mid-speech for a few weeks now. So the commentators all ask, Vayelech, and he went, where did he go? Hasn't he been standing here and talking at them for this whole time and teaching and speaking and orating? Hasn't he been doing this the whole time? What do we mean he went? Where did he go? And the commentators say it must be that there's a shift here. So if we go back to Kitavo, that he was at that point talking about the laws. What do we have to do? What do we have to not do? What are the consequences if we don't follow God's teachings? What are the rewards if we do? And then the commentators say, okay, if we have Vayelech here, he actually must have paused and sent everyone home after the kind of more didactic part of the speech. And now he's going to bring them back, and that this is the more personal one. But instead of bringing them back, as Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, a 20th century rabbi, said, it was not that he asked them all to come back. Moses is said to be the most humble person who ever lived. Instead of asking them all to come back like a king holding court, Moses went out to each tribe to give this final message, and to give this final message of what he truly, on an emotional level, wants the people to know, and what he wants to share with them. And in this moment, other commentaries, Rambam says they are one of my favorite 11th century Spanish, Egyptian, Israel, he moved around a bit, commentators said that he was going around and actually giving the blessings that we'll see in a couple of weeks in a Vizot Bracha individually to each tribe. He went around, Vayelech, is he walked to each tribe to give it to each one of them individually. And Ibn Ezra, who lived around the same time as Rambam in Spain, suggested that Moses gave each of these specific blessings because he wanted to inform each one personally of what was about to happen. He knew that these people, especially the children of the freed slaves, had only ever known him as a leader. And so he wanted to break the difficult news that his time was coming to an end to each tribe individually. And I think here in Ibn Ezra's interpretation of why Vayelech, why did he have to go out, and building off of Rambam saying he went to each tribe one by one, there's something important to learn about how we communicate, especially the biggest moments in our life, for good and for bad. We live in a world where a lot of times we can kind of say social media can cover everything. If I have a big life-changing announcement to make, it's something that can be just kind of posted onto my Facebook or my Instagram or my Twitter or any other social media platforms one might use, and then everybody will know. Everybody who's friends with me will know. There's a temptation to do that. But we are here being warned by Ibn Ezra, who says that Moses could have done the same. He could have just reassembled the entire people instead of going tribe by tribe and told everybody at once and let it go. And let all of them know that his time was coming to an end, that his time of death was approaching, and that Joshua's leadership was approaching, and that it was time for them to look to a new leader. He could have had everyone come back together or said it during the earlier speeches. And instead he goes to each one individually. There's a recognition that when it comes to deep communication, the biggest things that happen to us, it needs to be face to face or at least voice to voice individually. I think of, for example, when I was first got engaged. I did post about it on Facebook. Of course I did, to share with many, many extended friends and family. But first, I made the point to call those closest to me to share the news. The same is true for those happy occasions like getting engaged, and the same is true for those sad occasions such as when we lose a loved one. Those most impacted, those closest, deserve the direct communication, deserve the opportunity to sit with the news with the person who's sharing it, because that is a space of connection. That is a space of community. It's very tempting, especially when we call it social media, to think that posting on Facebook is sharing, but it is not the same kind of sharing. There's no inherent community in it of us looking to one another and hearing and sharing in good news and sharing in bad news, sharing in painful news and sharing in joyful news. And so I think here we have Moses not only not only showing the humility of going to each person, but reminding us that there are certain times, certain pieces of news that we must share with our family one to one, even if it takes more time. If we believe Rambam and Ibn Ezra in their understanding that when he says it to all, El Kol Yisrael, to all of the people, he actually didn't say it one time, but at least 12 times, because he went to each tribe. Reminder that our biggest moments and those closest to us deserve to hear it directly, even if that means we're saying it multiple times to share. Shabbat Shalom. This week, in this day, as we remember the 20th anniversary of the attacks on 9/11/2001, we're reminded again the pain and the importance of community connection. One of the things I remember most clearly about that day was everybody coming together and really sharing face to face and sharing with one another our own thoughts and our own feelings. I don't know what it might have looked like had we had quite the access to social media as we have now, but I think there was something very valuable about us getting to share the pain of that day with one another and to sit with one another in those pains and to reach out to our friends and family. So as we also honor the memories of those lost that day and the traumas that many and all of us experienced on that day, remember the importance of sharing our deepest feelings and our biggest news events with one another directly, and keeping our communities and our families close. Say Shabbat Shalom. This weekend we move into Yom Kippur later on in the week, and so I hope we have a week and a continued 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur of true connection, of finding the ways to speak to people. You know that we remain at a distance physically, but we do have those abilities to really speak to one another, not only like this where I'm getting some feedback, but it's just not the same as if we were able to be in the room together, or even just on the phone speaking to one another. I'll encourage us this week to find the ways that we can truly reach out and share the biggest moments in our lives, for good and for bad, with those whom we hold closest to us. I'll say Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much for joining me. Shabbat Shalom to Phyllis Luger and to Deborah Taylor McGee and Julia Whitehead. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for taking this moment of connection with me, and I will look forward to seeing you soon. We will be both available and on live stream at 10 o'clock for our Shabbat morning service for this Shabbat Shuvah. So I look forward to seeing you or being seen by you very soon. Shabbat Shalom.